Hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this podcast. We are very pleased today to have an international evaluation podcast sponsored by the American Evaluation Association and by the American Journal of Evaluation. I'm Zenda Ophir. I am an independent evaluation specialist from South Africa. I'm currently based in Geneva in Switzerland.
Hi, and I'm Deborah Rugg. I'm also an independent evaluator and a former UN Secretariat Evaluation Director in New York. And it's my great honor today to introduce to our listeners our new special section of the American Journal of Evaluation on international developments in evaluation. And we have the pleasure to have a couple of our authors, our contributing authors with us today to talk about their article. We have with us Aaron Zazueta, who's a Mexican national now living in New York City and an independent evaluator as well. And also Nima Baramalian, who's originally from Iran, now working with UNIDO, which is the UN Industrial Development Organization in Vienna, Austria. Their article is entitled Development Trajectories and Complex Systems, Informed Theories of Change. So my first question, Nima, to you is, as a project manager managing projects in these complex systems, how do you see the benefit of using a complex systems theory approach to theories of change versus the familiar results-based management framework so common in the mainstream project management literature?
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Zenda, for this opportunity, and happy to be here. Well, I think there's a paradigm shift in the development discourse from more input-oriented development assistance and accountability towards long-term impact, adaptation to megatrend, and partnerships for development, which is captured in the Sustainable Development Goals. The project cycle management and the tools that we have for that are somehow simplistic and not adequate enough in that context to be able to help the project managers to drive those projects that they are more ambitious in terms of transformational objective. Often, if I radically simplify it, we do the context analysis, we describe the problem, we design a solution and implement it. But that analysis gives us a static picture, and it's done once. We do it at the beginning of the project, then we design a program and we continue implementing that. We don't do that throughout the project. And that itself limits the adaptive capacity of the project because the changes in the environment are not getting reflected on the project interventions. And I think also there's an issue of problem simplification because as someone that is sitting in UNIDO and I have to deal with industrial development, or someone else that is sitting in another organization, we tend to see the problems from our own lenses, or lenses of we can see the problems the way we can address them. So sometimes those causes of the problem that fall outside the mandate of the project or the organization that is dealing with that project, they often are left out, that they are left untreated, or at best they may find a place in the risks and assumptions part of the results-based management. So I think that results into kind of a simplistic causal relations between the inputs and outcomes of the project, which is obviously not adequate for driving transformational change. So if really the objective and in this paradigm shift is to move towards projects that they are changing development trajectories of a sector or any type of socioeconomic system from non-inclusive, non-competitive, non-sustainable towards more sustainability, efficiency, and equity. These changes all require real transformations and scale at the system level. And transformations at the system level, of course, they need management of complex processes. But typical results-based management or logical framework are very effective in a very highly controlled and relatively predictable system. But the socioeconomic systems that we're dealing with, they're really the opposite.
Nima, what you've just said, there's so many important messages for how we need to work in order to be really relevant for the transformations that are needed at this time. So this is one of the main aspects that are so valuable in your program, is that you really take head on the practicalities in how to start dealing with the challenges of our time in a different way to what we've been used to in evaluation. And so, Aaron, if I can turn to you again in the context of your paper, Why do you focus on development trajectories? It's obviously a very neglected concept in most evaluations, and in fact in most development interventions and strategies.
Yes, thank you, Senda. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, you know, the issue of transformations, basically transformation are long-term aspirational objectives. We're talking about things that will happen a long time from now, basically. So we need to have a more intermediate way of knowing if we are actually moving in the right direction. Are we moving towards those objectives? So here's where the notion of development trajectories come in. Actually, it's a more of intermediate sense that allows us to know whether we're moving in the right direction. Also, when we focus on the conditions that are enabling a given trajectory or enabling behaviors that move in a certain development trajectory, it gives us an even shorter term handle as to how to deal with things. Now, the other challenge, of course, is that when we take long-term goals, many things could happen from now and from whenever 10 years from now or 30 years from now when things are supposed to happen. So complex systems thinking and the notion of development trajectories as being dynamic also help us to make adjustments all the time about our premises. And our premises or assumptions are basically what are the key enabling conditions. So we basically are constantly checking to see if indeed those enabling conditions are getting us where we want to go, and if we are moving in the direction towards our ultimate goal, which is really the transformation.
Interesting. Thanks, Aaron. Nima, I was wondering, could you describe how you actually use complex systems models in designing an intervention and then beginning to implement it, to give us a real sense of this?
Sure. I mean, before answering that, I would just want to recognize that the problem of complex systems is that they are actually complex. So, and there are not so many project management tools available at hand that can deal with such complexity. So I think it's a kind of a work in progress. We are trying some different approaches and testing them. And we took up that challenge in a way together with Aaron and some of my colleagues to see how we can deal with this complexity at the level of the design and implementation of the project. We borrowed heavily from some multi-criteria decision-making approaches that have been around for some time, like analytical network process or Demattel technique, and because they are also dealing with the same issues of complexity and conflicting areas. We have piloted this in a couple of countries, and we have captured that in a chapter that is upcoming in the conference book of ideas, and I think it will be published soon. But the centerpiece of this approach is a meaningful and organic engagement of the stakeholders in developing the theories of change. A theory of change that is based on the root causes, is well studied, is only good enough, or it can be good if the people who are actually supposed to act to create those conditions are also on board with them and they actually act on that. So I think engagement of the stakeholders from the very beginning to identify those conditions and identify what needs to be done, and giving them a kind of a map that basically provides the visual map of what the sector can achieve and what are the conditions to achieve that, I think is important. And I think we try to look at the projects also not as single alone projects, but embed them within a larger network of conditions and the stakeholders. So I would say that the human aspect of this socioeconomic system is very strong. So I think the key to being able to design and implement interventions that are transformational is meaningfully engaging all the stakeholders from the very beginning at the design stage and also implementation. In practical sense, what that means is that we have established kind of advisory groups that they are consisting of the representative of the stakeholders of the sector. They are being basically engaged to provide inputs, to assess and basically help develop the theories of change. And they will be also engaged throughout the implementation of the project, where they can bring in inputs in terms of what is changed in the external environment, what are the project results, or how can the project can be adapted to the changes in the environment. So in a way, engaging those stakeholder groups throughout the project and creating that basis as a kind of a theory that later on can be also used for evaluation.
So Nima, if I could ask just one follow-up, our listeners might be wondering, well, do you do multiple theories of change when you have complex systems and multiple stakeholders and sectors and then aggregate it up, or do you one grand one? How does it work?
Actually, the answer is yes. I think because the conditions are different in nature, a condition that is referring to, for instance, awareness of the stakeholders about a particular problem is very different in nature from, let's say, applying good practices or a policy response. So yes, then for each of these conditions, I think we will have to go one level deeper. So once we identify the conditions, we also try to use different theories of change that they are more relevant for those conditions to develop mini theories of change, let's say. And in some cases, we see that, for example, when we go a bit more in detail or we narrow down the domain of the condition that we are dealing with, sometimes the complexities become less and more linear theories of change would apply better than complex theories. But when we are looking at the macro level and the system level, then the complex system gives a better foundation for integrating the different conditions.
One of the things that I really appreciate about the article is that it stimulates us all in evaluation to think differently about things that we are used to doing routinely in very particular ways. And really, this is the time in order to, in a way, we need to think about something like multiple theories of change, their integration, and all the aspects that you spoke about. And it's also nice that you draw it down to practice through the application that you have illustrated in the article, while not ignoring the fact that it's all still quite complicated to implement. Yet you show the way towards that. So perhaps the last question from my side to Aaron is, how do you actually use this framing that you've developed, this framework or model for an evaluation?
Yes, thank you, Senda. Well, you know, the article presents a step-by-step approach on how to apply this methodology or this form of doing theories of change. And I should say that to complement what Nima said, the theory of change, let's say the macro theory of change of the system, changes with the evaluation. The evaluation is a learning process, and we start with a model, and by the end, it's actually quite different because we learn more about what were the different aspects of the that are at play in the system and how the different parts of the system play. So keeping that dynamism in mind, that you don't start and construct a theory of change and stick with it throughout the evaluation, but rather you modify it as the evaluation goes by, as more information comes up. So what we do basically, a key problem with complex systems is to really set the boundaries of the system, because eventually the argument could be made that everything is connected to everything else, right? So, okay, what is the relevant phenomenon for these long-term objectives? And here's where, again, complex adaptive system is very helpful. Provides some tools to identify a model of the system with what one's dealing with. And I refer to a model basically because this is basically somewhat of a selective approach. You know, we could not deal with it if we don't somehow demarcate it in a way that is somewhat manageable. And then, of course, what are the elements of that model and how those elements interact together? And of course, that leads to the complexities, that multiplicity of elements and factors that are interacting with one another. But we can identify those elements. We do have a clear notion of what are those elements, and we can trace through the process. Now, once we have identified basically the model and characteristics and we can sort of anticipate what its emerging qualities might be, what we did is we actually tested that by gathering data and using network analysis to identify the most prominent enabling conditions, the most influential conditions in the system. So we decided, okay, what we'll do is we'll focus our testing and our information gathering on these particular conditions that seem to be the most influential throughout the system, that seem to generate cascades of effects, cause effects in the system. And basically what we did is, okay, we want to see to what extent did the system change, to what extent does the project interact with those key elements or key conditions of the system that bring about change, and to what extent can we actually tell that indeed this change took place because of these interventions, considering that other things are happening as well. What other things happen as well, you know? So basically here we get closer to the contributional analysis type of approach, but we are able to basically trace the chains of causality in the system to an extent, because at one point, basically the interactions become so multiple, so many throughout the system that we just basically at the very end can see the outcome as you wouldn't, similar to neural networks, for example. There's a black box in between there, you know, but you can see where the entry point is and what the outcome is. Then we can have pretty certainty that indeed something's happening, that the intervention has worked or not worked.
I wish we had more time to continue this conversation, because it is obviously so pertinent to the ways that we need to work. I really want to thank the two authors, and I just want to also remind everybody that we have 4 articles in the special section. The section is on international development in evaluation, and it is related to transformation, evaluation for transformation and transforming evaluation. So please take time to read through this. It will be available for about 2 weeks on open access, and make use of the opportunity to both inform yourself of the content and perhaps comment on that in discussions that you may be having. It was a pleasure having you as our audience, and we trust that you have enjoyed being with us.